He and I both have Swiss passports, and my mother is Swiss.
Colin, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. I just had your wife on.
Yes.
And Yin was fantastic. And both of you are researchers?
I'm not a researcher. No,
You're not a researcher, but we're going to get into that real quick. Where were you born?
I always struggle a little with that question, actually.
Don't say you're military. Were you military? Your father was in the military?
My father was in the military before I was born.
Okay.
I was born in Northern Virginia, just really a stone's throw from George Washington's home.
Okay. Now, why do you struggle with that whenever someone asks you?
I generally tell people, I used to tell people I'm born from Washington, D.C., and I technically am not in the city, and it gives a wrong impression. And then I used to tell people I'm born in Virginia. I spent a long time kind of traveling around the world, and I would say Virginia, and everyone would say, you don't sound like you're from Virginia. Because everyone figured, you're from Richmond or Southern Virginia. I'm like, yeah, I'm from Northern Virginia, and suburban Washington is a very different entity.
That's
and
true.
My father worked at the Pentagon, and it's a very transient area and very political, and so it's different. And now I have gone back to say Washington because my wife was born in Beijing, and I like that contrast of these two powerhouses in the world, and you're in the capital of
But you were actually born in Virginia.
Yes, I was born in Northern Virginia.
Northern Virginia. Yeah. Are either your mother or father from there?
No, neither. So what I tell my son now, when he says, where's he from? And he was born in Philadelphia. I tell him to say he's Swiss. So he and I both have Swiss passports, and my mother is Swiss, and my mother was born and raised in Switzerland.
If the mother is Swiss, you can become Swiss automatically.
If your parent is Swiss, either of your parents is Swiss,
you get the passport immediately.
You can inherit the passport. You inherit the passport from them. Yeah. So it was interesting once when we were traveling in Japan. Where were we? We were in Okayama, I believe, and traveling with some Italian friends, and we were stopped by interview group with a camera, and they asked my son, who at that time was maybe 8 years old, and they said, "Oh, so where are you from?" And he said, "Well, I'm from Switzerland," and the Italians kind of stared at him. I was like, "What are you talking about? You were born in Philadelphia." But it came from a time when I spent a lot of time traveling, mostly around Australia and New Zealand, and I would tell people I'm American, and I had to hear an endless diatribe about what America does wrong in the world, and how America's global position in the world is bad.
But who were you around? What type? Some of the same people in the same field you're in?
A lot of Canadians.
In your field?
No, this is after college. I was not in any field per se.
Well, Canadians are our biggest lovers. No,
right. Well, it wasn't just. It was Australians. I
understand.
I took a year off after college, and I traveled around Australia and New Zealand for a year, and met other travelers, backpackers, Canadians a lot, British a lot, some Australians, New Zealanders, sort of more local.
Oh, you were 20 what? 1, 2?
21.
21.
Yeah.
Do you have siblings?
I have two older sisters.
How many years difference between you and the oldest?
4.
Oh, you guys are tight.
Yeah.
You're tight. 4 years.
Chronologically, yes.
Yes.
Emotionally, socially.
They beat up on you when you were a little boy. Come on, you're the young.
Yeah.
You're bullied too.
Yeah. They were
bullied by your two big sisters.
They were dominant to a degree.
Same mom and dad.
Same mom and dad. Yeah. They were. My older sister was very dominant. My middle sister more quiet. See, but we didn't necessarily have close relationship.
Because 4 years is about the space. They're not old enough if they're 4 years older to be able to do anything with you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But once you get past that, 5, 6 and stuff, sometimes they're actually taking care of you. The parents will have them help them take care of you. But your
not
sisters
in our
probably
case.
didn't.
Yeah.
No, yours didn't.
Not in my case. No.
What kind of work did your mom and dad do?
My mother trained in textile design, and for a while when I was in elementary school, she was the art teacher in the elementary school.
In yours?
In mine. And otherwise she didn't. She was a homemaker. My father, when my parents got married, my father left the Navy, and he was. It's a little bit of a funny story, but he ended up at the Pentagon in Department of Defense.
So he was an
And
officer while he was in the.
he was a
No.
captain in the
Okay.
Navy, like you. He avoiding to avoid the draft.
Vietnam.
Yeah, he
Yes.
went to officers candidate school after
Well, he didn't get
college.
drafted, did he?
No, because he was already an
Oh,
officer in the Navy.
officer. I see.
So he
Okay.
did go to Vietnam.
Did he do his? He did college before he went in,
He did college before and
and
then
then
officers
ROTC.
candidate school,
Right.
and then joined the Navy from officers
Navy.
candidate school.
He didn't go to
Obviously,
Annapolis then at all.
no,
No. Okay.
he was not in Annapolis. I don't know
Oh.
where he did officers candidate.
Oh.
He went to Northwestern University undergrad. He grew up in around Chicago.
And you said he passed away. How long ago?
He passed away in 2021,
How old was he?
just shy of 90 years old. Just
Oh,
a
he
few
had a
weeks
good
shy.
run too.
He had a good run.
That's not
Yeah,
bad.
yeah,
That's
he
not
did
bad at
well.
all. Mom and dad stay together the whole time.
Yes. Yep. The whole
And how's your
time.
mom doing now?
My mother is 91. She's okay. She has her health problems of a 91-year-old.
And she's living where now?
She same house in Northern Virginia.
Oh wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
How many? Both sisters close by her?
No. My oldest sister lives in San Francisco, and my middle sister lives close by, a few miles
Oh,
away.
close by your
Yeah.
mom. Yes, so someone's still there. Oh, so tell me. So when you were in school, were you? I can almost guess. Were you more academic or more physical minded?
I was. I wouldn't say I was academic necessarily. I wasn't into team sports or such. I was a swimmer by and large.
You started when? When you were in elementary?
Swimming?
Yes.
Oh, before I could walk.
Oh, you've been swimming all the time.
My father was the type,
Took you right away.
Yeah,
Threw you in and said,
before you're 12
okay.
months old, throw you in the
Yeah,
water.
throw you and say, okay, see what you
sink or
do.
swim. Yeah. And so I was always swimming. We had a pool in the
So you don't
neighborhood,
remember
and we
when
were
you started, yeah.
No, I have no
Yeah,
idea.
I'm
There
like
was
that
no
too.
concept of
Right.
learning to swim.
Yeah, you just knew that was
Yeah,
part. It was like walking. Like when you learn to take your first
Yeah.
step, you don't remember.
I was certified
Right.
as a lifeguard before I was old enough to be a lifeguard, right? Because there
You
was
were that
just
good,
no other
right.
training to do. But I was the kid that was always, I grew up along the shores of the Potomac River. And so I was always the kid that was walking through the marshes and the swamps and the streams and looking under rocks and finding frogs and crayfish and things like that. So biology as a science was always my thing. So I wasn't a particularly good student, but I was great in science.
You you like nature and seeing things. and what
Yeah,
happen.
biology, chemistry, and the other sciences as they fed into it, I learned. But otherwise, academics, reading, writing, math, didn't generally hold much interest for me.
So, but did you ever get into any sports? Let's say when you got into high school, because they pretty much have pushed
Yeah,
you
you
into
have
something.
to. I mean, you do
Right.
the PE sports. Baseball. I played in. I didn't play as part of the school, but in PE classes and things.
Right.
Baseball was sort of
But
one
that
of
was
my.
not your thing.
No, I don't know, for all sorts of psychosocial reasons. I don't know that. Yeah, my mother didn't really encourage it necessarily, sports, for some reason. She was more into swimming was her
Were you on the
her
swim
first
team?
sport. My school didn't have a swim team.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And you
I
spent
was,
all this time in Virginia
yeah.
until what age?
I left Virginia. Then I went to university in Virginia, and when I was 24, I guess, I went to medical school in Philadelphia.
Let's back up. When you were in high school, you started to figure out that the areas. What areas did you like the most? You already said, but in
Yeah,
high school
biology.
subjects, biology.
Yeah, biology.
So you
Was-
really excelled in that
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
So what did you think about what kind of work you'd be doing? What do you want to be?
Yeah, it's funny when you were talking to my wife about that. It's a bit embarrassing, but when I was very young, I told people I wanted to be a plastic surgeon, and I wanted to go to Asia, and I wanted to fix the Asian eyes.
Are you
To be,
serious?
yeah.
But wait,
Because I had
what
seen
age?
something.
What age was this? What age were you
Probably
talking?
6,
7,
7.
okay. And you
I
would
had
fix the
seen
eyes?
something on, I don't know, 60 Minutes or something about plastic surgery, and that it was a trend in Asia that they were wanting their eyes.
double
And of course,
lid.
it still is now. It just
Double
should be
lid.
in Korea,
Yes, that's
right?
right.
Where it's a
Double
bit more
lid.
popular. So that's what I told people. And then I think in school, I was, like I said, I was an okay student. I was stellar in biology. I was so-so in other classes, and then I started university, and I was doing great in science classes again, like getting A's, but my other classes weren't great, and my advisor in university said, "Oh, you don't have a chance to go to medical school." He said, "You don't have the grades. You're not coming from a strong enough university to get into one of a good university school." And he's like, "You shouldn't do that." And a little bit disappointing at the time, and I didn't know any better, I think, at the time. And so my older sister was in a different university, but she was doing business. And so at my school, it was a trendy thing to do. That was the thing you did, business. So I did marketing as my...
You switched to marketing.
I switched to marketing, and I started to study
from high school, when you went to college, you went into marketing.
I went into marketing. I first started sort of doing sciences,
Okay.
and then when I was told, don't do this, then I went into marketing, and it was fine. I liked marketing itself. I didn't like the finance and accounting and the management classes that went with business. And then I added English as a second major, and I liked English at the time, but I have to say I didn't. Again, I've never been a fan of novels, so my English classes were usually classics, mythology, 17th century poetry, film and literature, and things like that. So I actually technically missed getting the degree by one class because I never did a major author. I should have done a class in
And you could have gotten to Julia.
And then I would have had a true
Yes, right.
a BA in English.
Right.
But I ended up with a kind of a second major, but it's not a complete for the lack of this one major novel class for technical reasons. But
isn't that interesting how you can get to a fork in the road and someone gives you the wrong directions, and they could have given you the right directions and changed everything?
Well,
the counselor, because of their personal feelings.
Because of their impression of it,
right.
and who I am and what it takes to go, and it was hard, I think, because I then didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't really like advertising.
Who knows at that age?
Yeah, I think it's hard.
Who knows at that age? It's upsetting to me at times how much damage sometimes our so-called teachers do to us, yet we have so many beautiful teachers. But I ask people this question: how many teachers inspired you in your life?
Remarkably few.
Two? One?
Honestly.
Two? That you remember today?
That I really remember? Two.
Okay. How many teachers did you have?
Oh, I was in school for, 20 years.
So I'd say this. What were the rest doing to you then? If
Yeah.
only two inspired you, what were the rest doing?
Yeah.
That's what bothers me. Our education system. The private schools here, for example, KL, you know how they do it? Which I think is a beautiful way of doing it. First of all, children should not raise children. And most of us have kids when we're children. Even if we're in our 30s or 40s, we're still kids. That's too early, and we don't know how to parent. We should give it to our grandparents. Let them do it. They have the wisdom. But in schools here, if you go to KL, that teacher from elementary all the way to the 6th grade stays with you. Doesn't change. So that means that person will only have about 4 or 5 classes that he'll ever teach of kids. But he gets to know them. He becomes like a surrogate parent.
Right. Yeah.
That's the way that we should be trained.
Yeah, and I think that
works.
You don't have that in the American system.
You get a different person in their attitude and how they feel.
Yeah.
I just want to get a paycheck. It's completely different. That's why you
Yeah.
only have 2 people
There
who
was
inspired you.
Few teachers who really reached out. In high school, I remember
It's kind of
world
late,
history
though.
teacher.
It has to happen in elementary.
Yeah, in elementary school.
But high school, you've already made up your mind.
Well, to some degree. I think I was,
what I mean?
at the time, I was, my biology teacher, I remember at the time, I was in advanced placement biology, and he was terrible. He was terrible.
Really bad. So what'd you do? Because you loved biology at the time. You get a guy that would rather be anywhere else but there.
Yeah. I finished the class. I did well in the class, but I didn't like him, and he clearly didn't like me, and he wasn't a good teacher. He taught his subject, but he didn't really teach you the other aspects of being a student, right? I was a freshman student in a sophomore class at the time, so it was science was always above. Everyone was always older than me, and I was young for my age at the time, young for my grade. Always, I'm always at the younger end of the spectrum. So it was challenging, and I went on and yeah, disappointing.
Yeah, he couldn't see
But you
the
go on,
passion.
and I remember I had a world history teacher, a woman who I really liked, and I would always go hang around her classroom, after school, and she and I would talk, and 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 she was, I don't know, I mean, culturally very different, right? I mean, my school was very mixed, black and white, right? And it was very mixed socioeconomically. A big part of the area where I grew up near it was called Gum Springs, which was George Washington's historical home for his slaves, and it still is.
It's not going
Basically,
to change, no.
it doesn't change, and it's
Oh,
and it's and then the other colleagues of mine in school were children of congressmen and senators, and because it's suburban Washington, so
right.
you have a
And you went to
vast
school at a
amount.
time when the school campus was still open and accessible to anyone.
Yeah,
They didn't make it look like a prison like they
yeah,
do
yeah,
now.
yeah. There was violence in my school at the time and whatnot, and it was a
But it wasn't
transient time,
but it
though.
wasn't gun violence, was it?
No
No.
fights.
It's with everyone's. That's since the day of schools.
Yeah,
Did you have fights in your school?
Boys.
The
yeah,
boys would fight. Yeah, see, but that's we butt heads to
yeah,
see who's who,
yeah. There was
right?
no,
Or to
none,
impress some girl on the
yeah,
side. We're
nothing like
always
you
in that.
have today.
Right. So you finish high school, you go into college in business,
In business and English.
and you decide to
Yeah,
do business.
then,
And you weren't,
yeah.
your passion didn't drop
No,
any. You decided,
no. I really didn't know what to do at that time. I finished college, and it was just sort of an ending. I don't even think I went to my graduation. It didn't
but,
mean much to me at the time because I wasn't really that enthusiastic about what I was
right,
doing,
what you were doing, right?
and I didn't know what to do, and so I took a year off, and I got a work permit for New Zealand actually, and I went to New Zealand, and I realized when I got there, this was 1990, I guess, and there was no work really to be had in New Zealand. They were under tremendous depression, and unemployment was sky high, and so I just ended up traveling around from top to bottom of New Zealand
Alone?
alone. Yeah, meeting people.
Was that your first time leaving the U.S.?
No, so that's my mother's family is all in Switzerland. And so, my childhood was a little bit weird again where I grew up again because it was Washington, and I didn't grow up necessarily with a lot of Americans. I mean, in my school, I knew Americans and say that they were born in America, their parents were born in America, their grandparents were born in America, and for Christmas they go to Charlottesville or something to see their grandmother or something like that. And but I didn't. My father was an only child, so had no relatives. His parents were effectively, his father was American but German descent, and his mother was Norwegian. And my father grew up around lots of Norwegians, but as an only child, so there was no siblings or cousins or anything like that in the U.S. But my mother had a family in Switzerland, and we spent a lot of time in Switzerland. And that's where I had my cousins and my aunts and uncles.
How young do you remember going to Switzerland?
Do
you remember
again,
the first
it
time?
happened, no. The
So
first
they
time,
always
again,
took
I
you.
was,
That's why. So she
I
showed you off as a
was,
baby and
yeah,
everything. So you
yeah.
don't. That's all you know.
So every summer, not every summer, but many summers, we're back in Switzerland, and my grandparents had a house in northern
Did you ever
Italy.
learn to speak the language, Swedish?
As a child,
Swiss,
German.
Swiss, right.
As a child,
German,
I
right.
did, and then I lost it sort of later on when I started school. I still can get my way through, but not. I went about 20 years without speaking it at all, so it was a little bit lost during that time.
So business school, you get out, you're lost, you go to New Zealand, and after New Zealand, where'd you go?
Australia again for about 9 months.
Okay.
And
so if you couldn't
all over
find any
Australia.
work, how were you funding all this?
Rich daddy.
Your father was paying,
Yeah,
sending
he was
money?
well-to-do.
Really?
Yeah, my parents paid for it all. Yeah.
So you just say, Dad, can you send a couple more thousand? I need,
Basically.
it's good. I'm good to go.
Yeah.
I want to get a motorcycle on this trip.
Yeah, I didn't do that. I mean, I was somewhat cautious, right? It was cheap, staying in youth hostels and buses and things like that. But it certainly.
Well, see, one thing for sure, you're the only son. So they
Yeah.
want to make sure. I mean, you're the baby boy.
Well,
You're
if
the
you
one.
talk to my sisters,
That's right.
they'll tell you
They
I
were
was
mad at you.
completely spoiled.
They
They
were
still
mad
are.
at you. They were
Yeah,
mad at you.
still
They
are.
said, "Shoot, we didn't get to do that."
No, they did.
Why you
They
did?
they
They
went
got
to
to.
the
They
they
got to do
went to
whatever they
the
wanted.
they went to the UK.
Yeah, but I'm sure they
and,
were stricter with them than they
they
would have been
were,
with you.
I think, in the UK. It was
Sure.
part of it, but there was everyone's pretty well funded in my
Well, that's
family.
good. That's good. So after you went to Australia, then where'd you go? After the 9 months
Then I
there.
came back. So in Australia, I kind of reconsidered what I wanted to do. And so I thought, okay, I will go to medical school. And so I came back, but I hadn't, because I didn't do it in my undergraduate years, I had to redo all the prerequisites for medical school, the
You wanted to become
chemistry.
a surgeon. You still.
Well, I wanted to go to medical school. I'm thinking I really don't want to do business. And so I had to redo all the classes. So that took 2 years to redo, chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, calculus, kind of all the things I didn't do. So I did that, and then I applied to medical school, took the MCAT, studied for all of that,
Okay.
and went to medical school in Philadelphia. And then I
So at the age 40, when you finished,
nearly, yeah. So
how old were you
yeah.
when you got out of school?
So I think I started medical school, I think around 28.
Right.
Yeah.
So you finished at
Maybe.
28,
Yeah. I think
Okay.
I finished medical school
and
around
that's when you met
28.
Yen.
No, then after medical school, I wanted to be an oncologist
Okay.
and do cancer. In particular, I initially thought in medical school I'd be a pediatric oncologist, but then I did pediatrics and I hated it. Bad mentors, bad.
Okay. So the people made you dislike
Yeah,
it.
I
Isn't
didn't
it
like the
interesting?
pediatricians. Honestly, they were kind of strange people, and it was difficult, dealing with parents and sick kids and things. And I don't really want to do pediatrics. And I really, at that time, I really enjoyed oncology, and I did a lot of bone marrow transplant in medical school, which is an interesting side story in
and-
terms of research.
Yeah.
Anyway,
On what? On who?
humans, people,
You were
cancer
doing
patients.
bone marrow transplant.
I worked as a student with
As a student, okay.
oncologists and part of
right.
the team, but the medical school where I was had two major things: heart surgery, heart transplant, and cancer services. So they had a very large bone marrow transplant service at that time, where you would have people come in with various leukemias,
Right, of
lymphomas,
course.
breast cancer, and you would ablate their immune system and reconstitute it with
Right.
their or someone else's bone marrow.
How do you do that? What's the
So
process?
you give very high doses of chemotherapy that
Okay.
completely kill the bone marrow, and
But
they have
but
to
it
go
just
in
doesn't kill the bone marrow. It kills a lot of other stuff too.
well, it can have effects on kidney and lung and
Right.
heart. It has a lot of toxicities, for sure. The idea is you have usually an overwhelming cancer that you need to give very high doses of chemotherapy for it to kill the cancer, and as a consequence, it kills the bone marrow. So in some cases, you would harvest their own bone marrow before the chemotherapy and give them back their own bone marrow. But if the bone marrow was involved in the malignancy, if it was like a
Then you
leukemia, you
couldn't.
couldn't.
It's contaminated, right.
So you would take someone else's matching bone marrow.
But how
and
do you
use
how
that.
do you give it to them?
Oh, at
Bone
the
marrow, that's what-
time,
yeah,
at the
how-
time, it was a process. You did this bone marrow aspiration, where they would lay on a table, and you would take these very large needles and syringes, and into their hip bones, you would drive this needle into their hip bone, and then suck on the syringe to suck out the bone marrow, and then it would be processed, and then they just infuse it back through a vein. But now
through a vein.
yeah, and the cells find their way back to the
Oh,
bone
okay.
marrow,
So they find it
back inside the bone. But now they usually harvest just through vein. They have
They can do it
very
through the
fancy
vein, so you
machines
know
where
how
they
to do
can
it, right.
usually harvest this. You're looking
don't
for
have
the
to go into
stem
the bone
cells,
itself,
basically,
no.
right? So you're looking for those stem cells, and now
Right.
they don't necessarily have to.
Go
As
into
far
the
as I
bone
know,
itself, yeah.
I haven't done that.
Oh, you
now
think
in a
they're
long
still
time.
doing the? I don't think they're still doing the chemo anymore either.
So that
'cause
was
that's-
what I said. Part of the interesting. So at the time, the theory was, if you have breast cancer, you give higher dose of chemotherapy, you'll ablate them, and no one really studied it at the time, but it became commonplace medicine. And then in hindsight, people look back at it and they said, actually, survival rates are no better.
Yeah, but I was
than
going to say, how
what
many?
we do anyway. How many people did you kill?
Right.
Yeah,
How many
yeah.
people? Exactly.
I mean, granted, in
Just
this
a little
case,
bit of research
they
I've done, I
probably
was
would have died anyway, but you might have expedited
just,
it
right,
by
you
doing your
most
process.
definitely with
Yeah.
a lot more pain too.
Yeah, but it was standard of care at the time. That
I know
was
exactly.
that was what people
Again,
did.
as I was talking to your wife, it's when you really do find the cure that other people get involved and decide, hey, we can make some money off of this.
Science, yeah,
Sometimes, you know what I mean?
when you were talking to her about that, it's true, and I think the natural medicine, Eastern medicine, naturopathic medicine, pharmaceutical medicine, research medicine, hospital medicine, it's all very different, and there is, of course, an element there of profit, right? And I think about this for a long time, and ultimately, you have people who say, evil pharmaceutical, and pharmaceutical companies themselves are not. I think the majority of people who work in pharmaceuticals have a true dedicated interest in doing the best and finding the best solution, the best cure. It's the finance that gets in the way, right? It takes money to do the research, and obviously the product that you're making is the most expensive Nike sneaker you could ever make, right? And I think when you take finance people into it, it doesn't matter what they're making, right? It doesn't matter if they're making jewelry, if they're making perfume, if they're making clothes, or if they're making drugs to sell. It's a profit source.
The bottom line they're looking at.
That's
right.
the bottom line.
And,
and that
what it takes to get there.
As any business is, right? If you're making a sneaker that doesn't sell, you're not going to make that sneaker. And when you're making that sneaker, you're going to be looking for the cheapest way to make that sneaker you can.
You see, you felt my feelings then,
Yeah.
and I didn't have to say anything. That's why I wish we spent more money on HI than AI.
Yes.
You would have
yes,
felt
yes,
that. I was thinking, you get the cheapest labor you could possibly get.
Yeah.
And then you say, hey,
Yeah.
but you like the sneaker, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
You pay people, what, $12 a day, and you sell that one sneaker
Yeah.
for $400,
Yeah.
$500.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. And like I said, it doesn't matter then if it's a drug, right? You sell the drug for $350,000 because of the market will bear.
You know what gives me tremendous hope and optimism about our future? The fact that we communicate faster now than we ever have in our known time. And it's harder to pull the wool over our eyes.
Yeah. Well, I think
it's so easy now.
Going back in that, as I think, I talk to a lot of friends in pharmaceuticals and whatnot, and it's the converse of that, or the opposite of that, of driving by. I wish it were all driven by science, right, and outcomes. I really wish that was the case, but obviously finance comes into play. It has to, as the world works, right? It has to be. But there's also the force from people and patients families. And then that overlaps into the finance world as well, where now I see it has become a trend. There was a company recently that was making a drug for ALS. It's a very simple drug, actually, fairly easy to make out of kind of off-the-shelf things. But they put it in a proprietary combination. And they got FDA approval to sell the drug before they completed the testing, right? And they sold it for a lot of money, right? The company in a few years made about $4 billion. And then they did their study and they said, oh, look, it doesn't work. Which you kind of would have sensed before, right? That if you had done this, and I think this is where, you're putting one profit before, because I think it's pushed by Wall Street, right? To say, let's just get to the profit. Let's get to that, and we'll figure if it works out later. And I think it's a dangerous slope to get on, right? Where you're generating revenue before you have proof of efficacy. And I think that's, I don't know, if I take the pharmaceutical people out of it, because I know from working in medicine and working with people who went into pharmaceutical research, it's really of the purest of intentions to help.
And the thing is, like I said, because we have so much information now, what you'll find is that if you're in a field and you're not necessarily attached to it financially, you're not being paid by the companies that you can research them with a non-biased opinion, and you can look at it and say, wait just a minute. My wife's a doctor. She's a general practitioner. And I told her this: if you were a policeman or a fireman, it would have been better for you, because you would have understood what you were being taught. Policemen are taught to look for crime. Firemen are taught to look for on fires,
Mm-hmm.
doctors in her field are taught to look for the worst in human beings. And you're not taught a thing about nutrition.
It's
And you have to think of who
yeah,
finances your
your
education.
education.
Who's making sure you learn nothing about nutrition
Yeah.
when that is my fuel?
I think that has changed a lot.
Oh no, now it is because
Yeah,
we have more information and
yeah.
you have more doctors speaking
But
out.
yeah, I think it's changed a lot
Right.
in medical schools and such. And granted,
I hope so.
medical education, again, has also become a financial
It's a
entity, right?
business.
School is a business.
If a medical company comes in and says, "Look, you want the $5 million or not?"
Yeah, yeah, and
And this is what you have to
I
do
have to
in
say,
order for you to get. These are the books I want you to make sure go
again,
out.
the universities I was affiliated with, which I won't say were all good, but they both made a concerted effort to exclude pharmaceutical companies from accessing their students and their trainees.
That's beautiful.
And it did have an impact, to a big degree, and still professors and things still had associations with some pharmaceutical companies, and some I think were honest, legitimate. I am guiding you,
Right.
and others were financial benefit for the physician. It was another revenue stream, early retirement, and that's part of it. But it's you have to look at the world as a business, right? And nutrition's a business, and data on nutrition is unclear. It's vague, right? It's one of the most complex pharmaceutical studies you could ever do. If you just look back in time when we were younger and
No problem.
eggs were the enemy,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Never, it would send your cholesterol through the roof. You would die tomorrow if you had an egg. And now, oh no, eggs are good for you.
They're good for
should have
you.
more
Good
eggs.
source of protein.
Yeah,
You won't be as hungry.
Yeah, and it doesn't affect your cholesterol at all. It's what we now know. And
Isn't the enemy now milk?
Well,
Anything like
milk
those?
is now coming back.
It's
There was
coming back
a
too. It's
study
coming
I
back
just saw.
again.
Whole milk, maybe whole milk is better for you than these skim milks or
You're
these
right.
oat
You're
milks or these nut milks or
The
things.
one thing that they haven't let up on, and America has a cartel on it, and that's sugar.
Sugar's
They
definitely
say that's the evil.
yeah.
If you say,
Sugar and
because
salt.
they know it's so addictive, more than
Yeah.
any drug we could ever
Yeah.
imagine. They say,
Yeah.
"Go ahead, you can." They say, "Go ahead, you can say whatever you want about us.
Yeah.
You're still gonna want some."
Yeah. There's certainly
The brain wants it.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly, I think no one. I have a friend who recently had a massive heart attack here in Japan, and
How old is he?
56.
Yeah, and he has how many kids?
None, no
Okay.
kids.
Just
But, he talking to him, he ate a unhealthful diet, right? In Japan, it's also very easy to do, right?
Yeah.
Lots of Wagyu beef and
Wagyu,
right.
wow.
So it's but I told him, no one has ever had anything bad to say about broccoli and salmon, right? It's your kind of your go-to.
That's your go-to.
Every study
Right.
will come down and say, "Yeah, broccoli and salmon were great. Green vegetables are great."
right.
And so on one hand, when you're eating a bowl of Frosted Flakes, you know that's the wrong choice,
right?
The Pop-Tart is
But
the
it
wrong
tastes
choice,
so good.
but it tastes good.
So
And you
good.
say, "Oh, I wanted the cold milk and the
He said, "It's
crispiness."
okay. I'm gonna treat myself today.
Right.
This would be my cheat day."
Yeah.
But yesterday was my cheat day too.
Yeah.
And so tomorrow's gonna be my cheat day.
Well, when we, like looking at food, when we first came to Japan, and in particular, going to the shopping centers, and I remember once I had a tooth removed, and I was looking for something and everything, in this one shopping center I was in was tonkatsu, tempura, salty udon, salty ramen. The vegetable was like this one piece of bok choy, and you're just like, and then where are you telling me the Japanese diet is healthy? Right, and it's just as easy to find.
That is true.
Separated from the home diet. As I look, obviously, growing up in the U.S., Chinese food was around, and I lived right next to Chinatown in Philadelphia, and my wife and I went to Chinese food all the time, and then when I went to China actually to stay with her relatives, it was interesting where you see the home Chinese food, home cook, which is tremendously healthy,
isn't it?
And I think much healthier than the Japanese because of the amount of salt in Japan.
Yes.
Right, even in home cooking.
Yeah.
Right, it's tremendously salty.
I think it depends on what you focus on. Yeah,
Oh,
how you
yeah.
do
I
it,
mean,
how
you
you
can
do it.
obviously have your
Yeah, some people
choices,
do it.
but if you look at
That's right.
the statistics,
Okay.
leading causes of death in the U.S., it's cardiovascular
Right.
disease. In Japan, it's cerebrovascular disease. It's stroke, all driven by hypertension, right?
And
And probably salt
too much
intake.
salt.
That
Right.
you look
Right.
at in the
Salt
U.S.,
intake.
they say, oh, you keep your sodium, less than 2,000 milligrams a day, less than 4,000 milligrams a day. I think the average sodium intake in the U.S. is around 6,000 a day. It might change year by year, but something like that, 4 to 6,000. In Japan, when I last looked, it used to be 14,000 milligrams a day, and I think it's come down to 11,000 milligrams a day. But that's the difference in that. But in China, certainly with my wife's family, it was a lot of vegetables, a lot of fish, a lot
That's
of
right. Yeah.
not particularly salty foods, certainly not fried at home.
Right.
Not here. Whenever I go to the Japanese cooking classes, there's always inevitably something deep fried.
That's right. That's right. You've been going to some of the cooking
Yeah,
classes
yeah,
here?
yeah. When I first moved here. Yeah.
What will we find you doing now, Colin? What are you doing here?
Oh, now I'm
Come on.
rehabilitating.
All right. From what?
After
From
an
what?
injury. I have a spine injury.
Okay.
So
Was it a bad accident or something?
no, it's just bad genetics.
Okay.
Sort of.
Did your mother have that or your
My
father?
father did. Yeah,
Oh,
my
okay.
father did. And so I've been recovering from that. I spent a lot of time when we first moved here just with my son, just helping him in school and get used to it. And my wife works extraordinarily hard and is dedicated to her work and long hours. And so I was the home element.
Right.
But when we first moved to Japan, it was a 2-year tour, is what it was supposed to be.
How long ago was that?
We moved here in 2015,
Okay.
and then it just sort of got extended.
You've been here
And
9 years now, huh?
yeah, just over 9 years. And it was always, I always thought, well, we'll go back to US, I'll start to work again. We'll go back to US, I'll start to work again. And then we never went back. And I thought, oh, I could work here. I don't have a work permit here, so I don't. But I thought, oh, yeah, I could do medicine here. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to. If you're a foreigner in Japan, it's hard to get certified or you have to practice under someone. And I don't want to practice under someone. Part of my ego and my training, but in reflecting back on the my advisor in college who told me don't go into medicine, that you'll never make it. Eventually, I became a professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. So
You became a professor of medicine.
yeah, that's what I
University
did
of-
before I moved to
Okay.
Japan.
But you said you
So,
came up with a business degree.
but then
Marketing degree.
marketing, and then I
Right.
went back to university for pre-med, and then I went to
Right.
med school, and then I
Okay.
graduated with an MD.
Oh.
And then I went for
And what field? What field again?
I went for internal medicine
Internal medicine,
residency,
okay.
and then I did a 3-year fellowship in endocrinology.
Oh,
And that's where I met my wife, was doing the endocrine fellowship.
my goodness.
And then I went on to specialize in thyroid cancer and other non-diabetes endocrinology is what I did.
There's probably, well, I'm sure with the technology we have, there's so many different areas that you could probably go through online. Possibly.
There is, yeah,
Possibly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
I mean,
so neat.
I like to, now I do it not formally and just, but to counsel people on medical care, medical advice. I think you're still, medicine in general, it's very hard to find a knowledgeable and skilled physician. And I think it's hard to choose what is in your best interest for medical care, in deciding treatments and such.
So you still keep up with a lot of the literature and everything?
I
And you-
do. I still maintain my licensure and my certifications.
Don't you have to go
And-
back to the States to do that?
Yeah, not anymore. They
You
changed it
You
about
can
a
do it
year ago.
online now?
They have a new, you used to have to go back every 10 years. You would have
Right.
to take the certification test, and you would have to go to a test center in the US. Now they have this continuing program where it takes 5 years. I have to do it later today, actually. But you have to do a set of questions in your field. So I maintain internal medicine and endocrinology. So I have 60 questions. Every 3 months, I have to answer 60 questions. And then that gets tallied, and then you see if you pass through that regard in a online timed format. You have a few minutes for each question. And that's their new alternative to having this once every 10 years.
That's really good. You have to fly all the way back to the States.
And it was difficult to do the once every 10 years, right? It's a lot of...
I would think so.
It used to take 2 days to do. I think it's shorter now, and it was
Right.
still expensive. There's still money to be sucked out of people.
So to do it online is expensive.
They do it online, yeah.
And it's expensive.
Yeah, it's a couple $1,000s so that you have to pay over the years.
And that keeps you certified in the area that you're certified in.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what state were you certified at?
The certification is national.
Oh, it's national. Okay.
Yeah, but the licensure is by state.
Okay.
So I was North Carolina and Pennsylvania.
Uh-huh. Colin, if you could go back in time and meet the younger Colin and give him advice, how old would you be, and what advice would you give him?
On one hand, I was always more mature for my years, and I would say enjoy life a little bit more. Be a little bit less serious, a little bit, fixed in some ways. I think that, I tell my son often, just pretend you're a duck and everything just rolls off your back and you don't hold on to things.
That's beautiful.
So
That's good
intensely.
advice. Good advice. Thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all of you for watching or listening to this podcast. And never forget, it's all unknown, so continue to reach for the stars.
Because you're too blessed to be stressed.